The autumn rain hammered against the tinted windows of the black SUV as it rolled through the streets of Boston's North End. Inside, Marco Vitelli sat in calculated silence, his dark eyes fixed on the blurred lights of the Italian district passing by. At 28 years old, he had already carved his name into the city's underworld with a surgeon's precision. Young, ruthless, and disturbingly intelligent. Where his predecessors had ruled through brute force and outdated codes, Marco had modernized the operation, turning it into a sophisticated network that law enforcement struggled to penetrate. His tailored charcoal suit, custom-made on Savile Row, fit him like a second skin. A Patek Philippe watch gleamed subtly at his wrist, not the flashy gold chains of stereotypical mobsters, but the quiet wealth of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp and clean-shaven. Everything about Marco Vitelli screamed control. "Boss, we're here," said Tommy, his driver and bodyguard, glancing in the rearview mirror. Marco didn't respond immediately. He was reading a text message on his encrypted phone, his expression unreadable. Finally, he slipped the device into his inner pocket and looked up at the restaurant before them. The establishment was one of the most elegant in the North End, a 3-story brick building with ivy climbing its facade, warm golden light spilling from its arched windows onto the wet cobblestones. It was the kind of place where senators dined with lobbyists, where business deals worth millions were sealed over veal marsala and aged Barolo. It was also, conveniently, owned by one of Marco's legitimate front companies. "Tony, stay with the car." "Tommy, Luca, with me," Marco ordered, stepping out into the rain. 2 umbrellas immediately appeared above him, held by his men. They moved as a unit across the street, their footsteps echoing off the historic buildings. A homeless man sitting in a nearby doorway quickly averted his eyes. Everyone in this neighborhood knew who Marco Vitelli was, and everyone knew better than to look too long. The heavy wooden door of Ristorante Paradiso opened before Marco could reach for it. Giovanni, the aging maitre d', stood there with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Vitelli, what a pleasure. Your usual table is ready." "Good evening, Giovanni," Marco replied, his voice smooth and measured. He handed his coat to a waiting server without looking at her, his eyes already scanning the restaurant's interior. The dining room was a masterpiece of old-world elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables dressed in white linen. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of Italian landmarks, the Colosseum, the canals of Venice, the rolling hills of Tuscany. Soft opera music played from hidden speakers, and the air was rich with the aroma of fresh basil, roasted garlic, and expensive wine. Every head turned subtly as Marco walked through the restaurant. Conversations didn't stop, but they quieted. Eyes followed him with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. He was used to this, had been since he was 16 and his father had first brought him into the family business. Now, 10 years after his father's death, Marco had transformed that business into something his old man would have both admired and failed to understand. His usual table was in the back corner, strategically positioned with a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen doors. Luca took a position at the bar, his eyes constantly moving. Tommy stood near the table, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give his boss privacy. Marco settled into his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him. He didn't open the menu. He never did. Instead, he pulled out his phone again and scrolled through several encrypted messages. Business. Always business. A shipment coming in from Montreal. A judge who needed convincing. A rival crew testing boundaries in Dorchester. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with something to drink?" The voice was pleasant, professional, feminine. Marco didn't look up from his phone. "Vorrei una bottiglia del vostro miglior Barolo, qualcosa di invecchiato, almeno 15 anni, e assicurati che sia già decantato," he said in perfect Italian, his tone casual but commanding. "I would like a bottle of your best Barolo, something aged, at least 15 years, and make sure it's already decanted." It was a small performance, one he'd done countless times. The Italian language was part of his armor, a reminder of his heritage and authority. Most servers would nod nervously, scribble down the order, and hurry away to find someone who could translate. It reinforced the hierarchy, the distance between him and ordinary people. But this time, something different happened. "Certamente, signore. Abbiamo un eccellente Barolo del 2008 dalla tenuta Marchesi di Barolo. Note di ciliegia matura, cuoio e tabacco. Si sposa magnificamente con il nostro ossobuco, se posso permettermi di suggerirlo. Marco's thumb stopped moving on his phone screen. The response had come immediately, fluently, without hesitation. Certainly, sir. We have an excellent 2008 Barolo from the Marchesi di Barolo estate. Notes of ripe cherry, leather, and tobacco. It pairs magnificently with our ossobuco, if I may suggest it. But it wasn't just the fluency that made Marco's blood run cold. It was the subtle emphasis on certain words. The way she'd pronounced cuoio e tabacco, leather and tobacco. Those specific words. His father's signature. His father had always said that a good Barolo should smell like a gentleman's study. Leather and tobacco. It was a phrase Marco hadn't heard spoken aloud in 10 years. Not since the old man's funeral. And it certainly wasn't common sommelier language. Slowly, deliberately, Marco raised his eyes from his phone. The waitress stood beside his table with perfect posture, a small notepad in her hand. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her features were Mediterranean, olive skin and deep brown eyes that held his gaze without flinching. She wore the standard server uniform, white blouse, black vest, black slacks. Nothing remarkable, nothing that should have made his pulse quicken. But those eyes. He'd seen those eyes before. Or had he? E come fa a conoscere le preferenze di mio padre? Marco asked quietly, his voice dangerously soft. And how do you know my father's preferences? For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not fear, but acknowledgement. She'd known he would catch it. She'd wanted him to catch it. Suo padre era un uomo di gusto raffinato, she replied, her Italian now carrying a different weight. Your father was a man of refined taste. Then she added almost as an afterthought, Così come suo zio Carmine, as was your uncle Carmine. The restaurant seemed to tilt slightly. Marco's hand tightened imperceptibly on his phone. Tommy shifted his weight near the table, sensing the sudden tension, but not understanding its source. Uncle Carmine, his father's younger brother, the man who had disappeared 23 years ago, when Marco was only 5 years old, the family mystery that had never been solved, the wound that never quite healed. Chisei? Marco demanded, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a command. Who are you? The waitress met his eyes for a long moment. In that gaze, Marco saw something that unsettled him more than any gun ever had. Knowledge. This woman knew things. Things about his family. Things that had been buried with the dead and the missing. Sono solo una cameriera, Signor Vitelli, she said softly. I'm just a waitress, Mr. Vitelli. Then she leaned in slightly, just enough that only he could hear her next words. Ma alcune bottiglie di vino portano messaggi più importanti dell'etichetta. Il suo ordine arriverà tra 5 minuti. Quando lo servirò, guardi l'etichetta. Attentamente. But some bottles of wine carry messages more important than the label. Your order will arrive in 5 minutes. When I serve it, look at the label. Carefully. Before Marco could respond, she turned and walked away with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. No nervousness. No fear. She disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors as if she'd just taken an ordinary order for an ordinary customer. Marco sat frozen, his mind racing. Around him, the restaurant continued its gentle hum of conversation and clinking silverware, oblivious to the earthquake that had just occurred at table 7. Boss? Tommy's voice cut through his thoughts. Everything okay? Marco forced his expression to neutral, slipping his phone into his pocket with calculated calm. Fine. Get Luca. Tell him to find out everything about that waitress. Name, address, social security number, where she went to school, who she talks to, everything. And I want it in an hour. On it, Tommy said, immediately pulling out his own phone and texting Luca. Marco's eyes drifted back to the kitchen doors. They swung gently on their hinges, but the waitress didn't reappear. 5 minutes, she'd said. He checked his watch, a habit he'd developed from his father. In his world, timing was everything. Cuoio e tabacco, his father's phrase. Uncle Carmine, a name that hadn't been spoken in his presence in over 2 decades. And now this woman, this ghost in a server's uniform, had dropped them both into conversation as casually as recommending a wine pairing. Questions multiplied in his mind like a virus. How did she know about his uncle? What message could possibly be on a wine label? Was this an elaborate setup, perhaps by the FBI, or worse, by one of the rival families looking to get inside his head? But that didn't make sense. The feds didn't do subtle, and his enemies preferred bullets to riddles. 3 minutes had passed. Marco's fingers drummed once on the table. A tell he immediately stopped. Control. Always control. A couple at a nearby table laughed at something, the sound jarring in Marco's heightened state of awareness. He watched a businessman sign a credit card receipt. He observed a young couple sharing tiramisu. Normal people, living normal lives, completely unaware that reality had just shifted at the table in the corner. 4 minutes. The kitchen doors swung open. The waitress emerged, carrying a wooden tray with a wine bottle and a single glass. She moved through the restaurant with the same unhurried confidence, navigating between tables with practiced ease. As she approached, Marco forced himself to maintain his composed exterior, but every instinct he'd honed over a decade in this business was screaming that nothing about this situation was normal. She arrived at his table and set down the wine glass with perfect precision. Then she presented the bottle, label facing him, cradled in her arm as any professional server would. Il Barolo 2008 Camerichisto, she said. The 2008 Barolo, as requested. Marco's eyes went to the label. Marchesi di Barolo, the noble crest, the Italian script announcing the vintage and origin. And there, at the bottom of the label, something that shouldn't be there. A small mark, barely visible. A symbol he recognized immediately. His blood turned to ice. It was his Uncle Carmine's sign. A small drawing of 3 overlapping circles. Something Carmine had doodled constantly. A nervous habit that had marked countless notebooks and napkins during Marco's childhood. The family had called them Carmine's rings. After his disappearance, Marco's father had kept one of those doodled napkins in his study, framed behind glass like a relic. This wasn't possible. That symbol wasn't public knowledge. The FBI had never found it significant enough to document. The only people who would recognize it were members of the immediate family, and most of them were dead. Marco's eyes snapped up to the waitress's face. She stood there calmly, waiting for his approval of the wine, but her eyes told him everything. She'd known exactly what she was showing him. This was deliberate. This was the message. Dove l'hai preso? He asked, his voice tight. Where did you get this? L'etichetta, signore. Dalla nostra cantina, she replied innocently, her voice carefully neutral. The label, sir? From our wine cellar. But then she added, barely moving her lips, Il messaggio? Da qualcuno che pensava fosse morto da 23 anni. The message? From someone who's been thought dead for 23 years. The restaurant seemed to disappear around Marco. The opera music, the conversation, the clinking glasses, all of it faded into white noise. His heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since his first kill, since the first time he'd truly understood that this life meant living on the edge of a knife. Uncle Carmine was alive. The implications cascaded through his mind like dominoes falling. If Carmine was alive, where had he been? Why had he disappeared? Why surface now, through a waitress in Marco's own restaurant? What did he want? And most dangerously, who else knew? Quando? Marco managed. When? Chiuso, she whispered. Closing. She means when the restaurant closes. Uscita posteriore. Solo tu. Back exit. You alone. Then, in a louder, normal voice, she said, Posso versare il vino, signore? May I pour the wine, sir? Marco nodded mechanically. She uncorked the bottle with practiced expertise. There was no fumbling, no nervous energy. She poured exactly the right amount into his glass, the dark red wine catching the light from the chandelier above. Buon appetito, she said, and walked away without waiting for a response. Marco sat staring at the wine glass, his reflection distorted in the curved crystal. A young man who suddenly looked older, more uncertain. Around him, Ristorante Paradiso continued its evening service, ignorant of the bomb that had just been detonated at table 7. He picked up the wine glass with a steady hand, because even now, even with his world tilting on its axis, Marco Vitelli would not show weakness. He brought it to his lips and tasted. Leather and tobacco. Exactly as his father had always said. Marco brought the wine glass to his lips again, but this time he didn't taste it. His mind was spinning too fast, calculating probabilities and threats like a chess computer running scenarios. The Barolo sat untouched on his tongue for a moment before he swallowed, barely registering the complex flavors that would normally command his full attention. Uncle Carmine. Alive. The words repeated in his head like a mantra, each repetition bringing new questions, new dangers. He set the glass down carefully, his eyes tracking the waitress as she moved through the restaurant. She was taking an order at table 3 now, smiling politely at an elderly couple completely at ease, as if she hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in his carefully controlled world. Tommy stood near the bar, phone pressed to his ear, undoubtedly giving Luca instructions to dig into this woman's background. Marco watched his bodyguard's reflection in the window, the rain still streaking down the glass outside. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly as it had 15 minutes ago, but nothing would ever be the same. "Boss, you want me to order for you?" Tommy asked, approaching the table cautiously. He'd worked for Marco long enough to sense when something was wrong, even if he didn't understand what. "Not yet," Marco replied, his voice perfectly level. "Bring me the manager." Quietly, Tommy nodded and disappeared toward the back offices. Marco picked up his phone, scrolling through it absently while his peripheral vision never left the waitress. She was professional, efficient, unremarkable. How long had she been working here? How had she gotten past his background checks? Every employee at Ristorante Paradiso went through extensive vetting. It was one of his legitimate businesses, yes, but that made it even more important to control who had access. Someone who's been thought dead for 23 years. Marco's memory dragged him backward, unwillingly, to a night he'd tried to forget. He was 5 years old, small for his age, sitting on the stairs of his father's house in Revere. It was late, past midnight, and he should have been asleep, but voices had woken him. Angry voices downstairs. His father, Salvatore Vitelli, shouting in Italian, and Uncle Carmine's voice, pleading. Marco hadn't understood most of the words then. His Italian had been rudimentary at 5, but he'd understood the emotion. Fear. His uncle had been afraid. Then silence. The kind that makes a child's heart race. The next morning, Uncle Carmine was gone. Just gone. His apartment cleaned out. His car abandoned at Logan Airport. For weeks the family had searched. Marco's father had called in every favor, pressed every contact, turned the city upside down looking for his younger brother. Nothing. Eventually, the whispers started. Carmine had been skimming. Carmine had been talking to the feds. Carmine had run off with money that wasn't his. Marco's father had never confirmed or denied any of it, but his silence spoke volumes. The family had moved on, as families do. Carmine Vitelli became a cautionary tale, then a fading memory, then finally just another ghost in a business full of them. But Marco had kept his uncle's picture, a photograph from a family wedding. Carmine laughing with a champagne glass raised, his eyes crinkled with genuine joy. Marco had hidden it in his childhood bedroom, and even now, at 28, it remained tucked in a book in his study. He'd never quite believed his uncle was a traitor, and now apparently he'd been right. Mr. Vitelli. The manager, Roberto Carlisi, appeared at the table, his round face showing concern. Roberto was in his 50s, a legitimate restaurateur who understood that his generous salary came with the expectation of absolute discretion. "Tommy said you wanted to see me?" "The waitress," Marco said quietly, gesturing subtly toward the woman now delivering plates to table 5. Dark hair, Mediterranean features. "How long has she worked here?" Roberto followed his gaze, his brow furrowing. "You mean Sophia? 3 weeks, maybe a month. She came with excellent references from a restaurant in Providence. Giuseppe vouched for her, said she was professional, spoke fluent Italian, good with difficult customers." He paused. "Is there a problem?" "Sophia. A name. It was something, at least. Her last name? Rossi, I believe. Let me check her file." "Do that. And I want to see every document she submitted. Every reference. The name of the restaurant in Providence, everything." Marco's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Bring it to me in 10 minutes." "Of course, Mr. Vitelli." Roberto hurried away, his earlier concern now edging toward alarm. Marco's phone buzzed. A text from Luca. Got a preliminary on the girl. Name: Sophia Rossi. Age 26. Rhode Island license. No priors. Working on deeper background. 30 minutes. 30 minutes. A lifetime in Marco's world. He typed back, "Check Providence restaurant scene. Focus on who vouched for her. And Luca. Be thorough. This one matters." He set the phone down and allowed himself to really look at her now. Sophia Rossi moved with a fluid grace that spoke of training. Not just restaurant training, but something deeper. The way she navigated the tight spaces between tables. The way she balanced trays. The way her eyes constantly tracked the room. Those were behaviors learned through necessity, through survival. She was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid to approach him like this, or perhaps she was simply desperate. A memory surfaced. Uncle Carmine teaching him to play chess when he was 4 years old. "Always think 3 moves ahead, Marco," he'd said, moving his knight across the board. "And always remember, the most dangerous piece on the board isn't the queen. It's the pawn that makes it to the other side." Was Sophia a pawn? And if so, whose? The elderly couple at table 3 was leaving, the husband helping his wife with her coat. Sophia approached their table with the check, smiling warmly as the old man pressed cash into her hand with a generous tip. She thanked him in English, but Marco could see her eyes flickering toward his table, checking if he was watching. He was. Their eyes met across the restaurant for just a second. In that brief moment, Marco saw something that chilled him. Not fear, not aggression, but a deep, weary sadness. The look of someone carrying a burden too heavy, for too long. Then she turned away, clearing the elderly couple's table with efficient movements. Tommy returned, sliding into the chair across from Marco. "Luca's on it, boss. But he says this girl's clean so far. Too clean, maybe. No social media presence, no digital footprint before 6 months ago. Like she appeared out of nowhere. Or like someone created her," Marco murmured, his fingers tapping the table once before he caught himself. "Control. Always control. You think she's a Fed?" Marco considered it. Federal agents had tried to infiltrate his organization before, but never like this. Too subtle, too risky, and the feds wouldn't know about Carmine's rings. That symbol wasn't in any file, wasn't connected to anything they'd be investigating. No, this was something else entirely. "I don't think so," he said finally. "But I want eyes on her after she leaves tonight. Where she goes, who she talks to, where she lives, don't approach her, don't let her know she's being followed. Just watch and report." "Got it." Tommy paused. "Boss, you gonna tell me what's going on?" Marco met his bodyguard's eyes. Tommy had been with him for 5 years, had proven his loyalty and blood more than once. But this was family business, the kind that got people killed for knowing too much. "Not yet," Marco said quietly. "Trust me, Tommy, it's better if you don't know." Tommy nodded slowly. In their world, that answer was expected, even respected. Knowledge was currency, and sometimes it was a debt that couldn't be repaid. Roberto returned, slightly breathless, carrying a manila folder. "Her file, Mr. Vitelli. Everything we have." Marco opened it on the table, his eyes scanning the documents quickly. Sophia Maria Rossi, born in Providence, Rhode Island, according to her driver's license. Social security number, tax forms, references from Ristorante Napoli in Providence, a place Marco knew by reputation, though he had no connections there. Previous employment at various restaurants and catering companies. On paper, she was exactly what she claimed to be, an experienced server looking for work in Boston's competitive restaurant scene. But Marco had learned long ago that paper could be deceiving. "The references, you actually called them?" "Giuseppe did personally," Roberto confirmed. "The owner of Napoli gave her a glowing recommendation. Said she worked there for 2 years, was reliable, good with customers, spoke perfect Italian. He was sorry to lose her, but understood she wanted to move to a bigger city. All very neat, all very believable, all very possibly complete fiction." Marco pulled out his phone and took photos of every document in the file. "Thank you, Roberto. Tell Giuseppe I want to speak with him. Tonight after closing." Roberto nodded and retreated, clearly relieved to be dismissed. Marco returned his attention to Sophia, who was now pouring water at table 8. She moved through the restaurant like she belonged there, like she'd done this 1,000 times. And maybe she had, or maybe she was just exceptionally good at playing a role. The restaurant's rhythm continued around him. Courses were served and cleared, wine was poured. Conversations rose and fell like waves. Marco forced himself to play his part, ordering the ossobuco that Sophia had recommended, eating mechanically while his mind raced through scenarios. If Carmine was alive and reaching out after 23 years, he needed something. Protection, money, or perhaps he had information. Something valuable enough to risk exposing himself. But why use an intermediary? Why not contact Marco directly? Because he can't, Marco realized. Carmine was either being watched or was in a situation where direct contact was impossible. So he'd sent Sophia, a messenger who could get close to Marco without raising immediate suspicion. But that created its own problems. If Carmine was in danger, who was threatening him? The old families that might have wanted him dead in 2002 were mostly gone now, destroyed by Marco's own consolidation of power. The Russians? The Irish? Or perhaps something internal? A threat from within Marco's own restructured organization? Someone who knew the old secrets and feared Carmine's return? Marco's phone buzzed again. Luca. Providence restaurant checks out. But owner says Sofia Rossi quit 3 months ago, not last month. Says she told him she was moving to New York, not Boston. Timeline doesn't match her resume. There it was. The first crack in the facade. Sofia Rossi wasn't who her paperwork claimed. The question was whether Roberto and Giuseppe had been fooled, or whether they were part of whatever this was. Marco typed back, "Keep digging," and checked Giuseppe's finances for the past 6 months. Quietly. If Giuseppe had been paid to let Sofia into the restaurant without proper vetting, there would be traces. Money always left traces, no matter how carefully hidden. The evening progressed. Marco watched Sofia serve tables, chat with customers, laugh at an old man's joke. She was good, really good. Natural charisma combined with professional competence. Several male customers tried to flirt with her. She deflected with practiced ease, friendly but never encouraging. Smart. She understood how to navigate men's attention without creating problems. Around 9 o'clock, the dinner rush began to slow. Families with young children departed, leaving the restaurant to couples and business dinners. Sofia approached Marco's table again, this time to clear his finished plate. "Come era l'ossobuco?" she asked, her voice perfectly neutral. "How was the ossobuco?" "Excelente," Marco replied, watching her face carefully. "Excellent." Then, in a voice too low for anyone else to hear, "Chi ti ha mandato?" "Who sent you?" Her hands didn't shake as she stacked his plate. "Qualcuno che ha bisogno della tua protezione," she whispered back. "Someone who needs your protection. E che può offrirti qualcosa in cambio. Qualcosa che cambierà tutto. And who can offer you something in return. Something that will change everything." "Cosa? What?" But she was already moving away, carrying his dishes toward the kitchen. The brief exchange had lasted no more than 15 seconds, barely noticeable to anyone watching, but it had told Marco volumes. Carmine needed protection, which meant he was running from something, or someone. And he had information, something significant enough that he believed it would be worth Marco's intervention. The question was whether Marco could trust any of this. His uncle had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. For all Marco knew, Carmine had betrayed the family and was now trying to manipulate his nephew from the shadows. Or perhaps Sofia wasn't even working for Carmine at all. Maybe she was using Marco's family history to gain his confidence for some other purpose. Tommy's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then leaned toward Marco. "Boss, Luca says Giuseppe deposited $15,000 in cash 2 months ago. Said it was from a personal loan from his cousin in Italy, but Luca's checking. He doesn't think Giuseppe has a cousin in Italy. 15,000. Enough to ensure cooperation. Not enough to raise red flags with the IRS. Giuseppe had been bought, which meant this operation had been planned carefully, with resources behind it. Marco's jaw tightened. He'd trusted Giuseppe, had given him a position of responsibility in one of his legitimate fronts. The betrayal stung, even though he'd learned long ago that trust was a luxury in his world. "When this is over," Marco said quietly, "remind me to have a conversation with Giuseppe about loyalty." "Considered done, boss." The restaurant was emptying now. Several tables had paid and left. Sofia moved between the remaining customers with the same unhurried competence, but Marco noticed she kept glancing at the clock on the wall. Nervous? Or just keeping to a schedule? At 10:15, the last customers departed. A group of businessmen who'd been sharing a bottle of grappa and war stories. Roberto began the closing procedures, dimming some of the lights, while the kitchen staff cleaned and prepped for tomorrow. Marco remained at his table, nursing his wine. Tommy and Luca had taken positions near the front door and bar respectively, their presence a clear signal that the boss wasn't leaving yet. The remaining servers, there were 3 besides Sofia, finished their side work and departed with friendly goodbyes to Roberto. Then it was just Marco, his man Roberto, and Sofia. "Mr. Vitelli," Roberto approached nervously, "is there anything else I can get you?" Or, "Wait for me in your office, Roberto," Marco said calmly. "I'll want that conversation with you and Giuseppe shortly. Don't leave the building." Roberto's face went pale. He nodded quickly and disappeared toward the back offices, understanding that his $15,000 mistake had been discovered. Sofia was wiping down tables methodically, working her way toward the back of the restaurant. She'd removed her vest, was now just in her white blouse and black slacks. Her movements were calm, controlled, but Marco noticed her checking the front windows every few seconds. She was expecting trouble. Marco stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. Tommy, Luca, give me 5 minutes. Watch the doors. No one comes in, no one goes out. Boss, Tommy started to protest. 5 minutes, Marco repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. If anything seems wrong, you'll hear about it. His men exchanged glances but obeyed, taking positions near the front and back exits. Marco walked toward Sophia, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty restaurant. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time that evening, he saw real tension in her posture. They stood 3 feet apart, 2 people separated by secrets and blood and 23 years of silence. Parliamo, Marco said softly. Let's talk. Sophia set down her cleaning cloth and met his eyes directly. Up close, Marco could see details he'd missed before. A small scar above her left eyebrow, the calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work, the faint circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well in days. Tuo zio Carmine è vivo, she said quietly. Your uncle Carmine is alive. È stato nascosto per 23 anni, ma ora è in pericolo. Persone che pensava fossero morte stanno tornando. Hanno trovato qualcosa, documenti, prove. Se lo trovano prima di te, lo uccideranno. I poi verranno per te. He's been hidden for 23 years, but now he's in danger. People he thought were dead are coming back. They found something. Documents, evidence. If they find him before you do, they'll kill him. And then they'll come for you. Marco's blood ran cold. Quali documenti? What documents? Testimonianze, registrazioni, prove di chi veramente ha ordinato l'omicidio del governatore Marconi nel 1998. Testimonies, recordings, proof of who really ordered the murder of Governor Marconi in 1998. The name hit Marco like a physical blow. Governor Anthony Marconi, the assassination that had brought down 3 crime families and resulted in dozens of federal indictments. The case that had restructured Boston's entire criminal landscape. And according to the official record, the record that Marco himself believed, his father's family had nothing to do with it. But if Carmine had evidence suggesting otherwise, mio padre, Marco's voice was barely a whisper. My father. Sophia's eyes were filled with sympathy, but she didn't look away. Non tuo padre, ma qualcuno molto vicino a lui, qualcuno che ancora vive, qualcuno nella tua organizzazione. Not your father, but someone very close to him, someone still alive, someone in your organization. The implications crashed over Marco like a wave. There was a traitor in his inner circle, someone from the old days, someone who'd survived the purges and investigations, someone who'd been hiding a secret for over 2 decades, and now that secret was threatening to surface, which meant that person would do anything, kill anyone, to keep it buried, including Carmine. Including Marco himself. Dove, Marco demanded, where is he? But before Sophia could answer, the front window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Marco's instincts took over before his mind could process what was happening. He grabbed Sophia and pulled her down behind the nearest table as gunfire erupted, shattering the crystalline silence of the restaurant. The chandeliers above them swung violently, one of them exploding in a cascade of glass and sparks as bullets tore through it. Jew! Marco shouted, covering Sophia's body with his own as wood splintered around them. Down! Tommy and Luca had already drawn their weapons, returning fire toward the shattered front window. The muzzle flashes lit up the darkened restaurant like strobe lights. Marco could hear the distinctive crack of their 9mm pistols mixing with the heavier reports of what sounded like assault rifles from outside. This wasn't a random hit. This was planned, coordinated, professional. Boss! Back exit! Luca screamed over the gunfire, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Marco pulled Sophia toward the kitchen, staying low, using tables and the bar for cover. Bullets chewed through the wood panels behind them, sending splinters flying. The carefully curated photographs of Italian landscapes shattered and fell, glass raining down around them like deadly snow. They burst through the kitchen doors. The stainless steel surfaces reflected the chaos, pots and pans scattered across the floor. The night's prep work abandoned in the sudden violence. Marco's mind was racing, calculating exits, threats, possibilities. The back door led to an alley, but if this was a professional hit, that exit would be covered. The basement, Sophia gasped, reading his hesitation. There's a service tunnel, leads to the building next door. Old bootlegger passage from Prohibition. Marco stared at her for a split second. How did she know about passages even he didn't know existed in his own restaurant? But there was no time for questions. Behind them, the gunfire continued, now mixed with the sound of breaking furniture and Tommy's voice shouting orders. "Show me," Marco commanded. Sophia ran to what looked like a standard storage closet, pulling open the door to reveal stairs descending into darkness. Marco followed, his hand instinctively going to the Glock 19 he always carried in a shoulder holster beneath his suit jacket. He'd never had to draw it in his own restaurant before, until tonight. They descended into the basement, the sounds of the firefight muffled but still audible above them. The space smelled of dust and old concrete, lit only by a single bare bulb that cast harsh shadows across boxes of supplies and old equipment. Sophia moved with purpose, weaving between the stored items to the far wall. "Here," she said, pushing aside a metal shelving unit that moved surprisingly easily. Someone had recently oiled the wheels. Behind it, barely visible in the dim light, was a narrow opening in the brick wall, partially concealed by decades of grime and neglect. Marco pulled out his phone, activating its flashlight. The beam illuminated a tunnel, roughly 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, disappearing into darkness. The walls were original brick dating back more than a century, with wooden support beams that looked dangerously rotted in places. Above them, the gunfire suddenly stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the chaos. "Tommy," Marco said urgently into his phone. But the call wouldn't connect. Too much concrete and earth between them and the surface. Merida. "Shit. We have to move," Sophia urged, her voice tight with fear. "If they're professionals, they'll search the building. This tunnel is our only chance." Marco hesitated, every instinct screaming at him not to abandon his men. But Sophia was right. If this was about Carmine's evidence about the Marconi assassination, then Marco was the primary target. Staying would get everyone killed. He texted Tommy quickly. "In tunnel. Basement. Follow if you can. Stay alive." Then he and Sophia entered the passage. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the air stale and thick with the smell of mold and decay. Marco had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling, and more than once his shoulder brushed against the damp brick walls. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the confined space, mixing with the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. "How did you know about this?" Marco asked, his voice echoing oddly. "Your uncle told me," Sophia replied, not breaking stride. "He said your great-grandfather used it during Prohibition to move whiskey from a warehouse to the restaurant. It's been sealed off for decades, but Carmine had me open it 3 weeks ago. He knew this moment might come. So this had been planned from the beginning. Carmine hadn't just sent Sophia to deliver a message. He'd sent her to establish an escape route, to prepare for the inevitable moment when the past would come hunting. They walked in tense silence for what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes. Marco's mind churned through the implications of what had just happened. Someone had tried to kill him in his own restaurant, in his own territory. That took either incredible courage or incredible desperation, and based on the firepower involved, it wasn't a small operation. "Tommy and Luca," Sophia said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Are they? They can handle themselves," Marco said, more confidently than he felt. "They've been in worse situations." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Those assault rifles had been military grade. His men were good, but they'd been caught off guard, outgunned. The tunnel began to slope upward. After another minute, they reached a dead end, old bricks that looked newer than the surrounding walls. Sophia ran her hands along the surface, found something, and pushed. A section of the wall swung inward with a groan of protesting hinges, revealing another basement, this one filled with restaurant equipment and commercial-grade storage. They emerged into what appeared to be a closed Italian delicatessen. The windows were dark, the chairs stacked on tables. According to the sign on the door, it had been closed for renovation for the past month. "Let me guess," Marco said. "Carmine arranged this too." Sophia nodded, closing the hidden door behind them and pushing a heavy shelf back into place to conceal it. "He's been planning this for 6 months, ever since he found out they were looking for him again." "Who's they?" Before Sophia could answer, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, read the message, and her face went pale. "We need to go. Now." They found the tunnel entrance. They moved quickly through the deli, exiting onto a side street in the north end. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and reflective with water, the old-style street lamps casting pools of yellow light. Marco could hear sirens in the distance, police responding to the gunfire at Ristorante Paradiso. This way, Sophia said, leading him down a narrow alley between buildings. They emerged onto Hanover Street, the main artery of the North End, still busy despite the late hour. Tourists and locals moved between restaurants and cafes, oblivious to the violence that had just occurred 2 blocks away. Marco pulled Sophia into a recessed doorway, out of the direct light. We need answers now. Where is Carmine? Safe house, Charlestown. But we can't go directly. We need to make sure we're not followed. She was scanning the street constantly, her eyes never stopping. Professional training, Marco noted again. This woman was much more than a waitress. Who are you really? He demanded. And don't tell me you're just a messenger. You move like someone with training. Military? Law enforcement? Sophia met his eyes, and in that moment, Marco saw her make a decision. To trust him, at least partially, with the truth. Federal Marshal, she said quietly. Witsec, I've been protecting your uncle for 3 years. Witness protection. The words hit Marco like a punch. His uncle wasn't just alive, he'd been cooperating with the feds. He'd been a witness against whom? He testified? No, Sophia said quickly. He was placed in protective custody before he could. And technically, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I broke about 40 protocols tonight. But the situation changed and the system is compromised. Compromised how? Someone leaked Carmine's location 2 weeks ago. We had to move him emergency protocol. Since then, there have been 3 attempts on his life. Her jaw tightened. Someone with access to federal databases is hunting him. Someone with resources. Someone who knows that if Carmine talks, it won't just be old mob bosses going down. It'll be current politicians, judges, law enforcement. The Marconi assassination had tentacles everywhere. Marco's mind reeled. The Marconi case had always been bigger than just organized crime. Governor Anthony Marconi had been leading a crusade against corruption, had been about to announce major indictments when a car bomb killed him and his wife in 1998. The investigation had focused on the Italian mob, specifically families in Boston and Providence, but had never conclusively proven who ordered the hit. Dozens had been arrested on circumstantial evidence, but the true mastermind had never been identified. The case had eventually gone cold, officially unsolved, though the damage to organized crime in New England had been catastrophic, and now Carmine supposedly had proof of who was actually responsible. My father, Marco said slowly. Did he know? Sophia's expression softened slightly. Carmine says no. Your father was kept in the dark. That's why Carmine ran. He discovered the truth by accident, and he knew if he went to your father, they'd kill them both. So he disappeared, took the evidence with him, and went underground. A car turned onto Hanover Street, moving slowly. Too slowly. Marco pulled Sophia deeper into the shadows, his hand moving to his gun. The vehicle passed, just a confused tourist looking for parking. But the moment of tension reminded them both of the danger. We can't stay here, Marco said. My car is 3 blocks away, but if they were watching the restaurant, they'll be watching it too. There's a taxi stand on Salem Street, Sophia suggested. Less predictable. They moved through the North End's labyrinthine streets, taking an indirect route, doubling back twice to check for tails. Marco's phone vibrated. A text from Tommy. Alive. Luca hit, but stable. 3 dead attackers. Cops everywhere. Can't reach you. Where are you? Relief flooded through Marco. His men had survived. He typed back. Safe. Stay with Luca. Talk to lawyers. Don't say anything to cops. I'll handle this. On Salem Street, they found a cab. An old yellow Toyota driven by a man in his 60s who was reading a newspaper and listening to a Red Sox game on the radio. Normal. Safe. Anonymous. Where to? The driver asked in a thick Boston accent as they climbed in. Charlestown, Sophia said. I'll give you directions as we go. As the taxi pulled into traffic, Marco finally had a moment to process what had happened. His restaurant shot up, his men attacked, his uncle alive and in federal protection. A conspiracy dating back more than 2 decades. And at the center of it all, evidence that could destroy not just his organization, but the entire power structure of Boston's criminal and political establishment. The evidence, Marco said quietly, keeping his voice low so the driver couldn't hear. What exactly does Carmine have? Recordings, Sophia replied, equally quiet. Your uncle was good with electronics, ahead of his time. In the late 90s, he started recording conversations initially for his own protection. He was worried about getting blamed for things he didn't do. When he accidentally recorded a planning session for the Marconi hit, he realized he had something explosive. Who ordered it? Sophia glanced at the driver, then shook her head. Not here. When we're secure. The taxi crossed the bridge into Charlestown, the old Navy Yard visible in the darkness, the USS Constitution's masts rising like ghostly fingers against the night sky. This neighborhood was historically Irish, though gentrification had been slowly changing its character. It was also, Marco knew, territory that had once been hotly contested between different criminal factions. Take a left here, Sophia directed the driver. Then third right. They wound through residential streets, past brick townhouses and small parks. Finally, Sophia had the driver stop in front of a nondescript 3-story building that looked like it contained apartments. Marco paid the driver in cash, over-tipping generously so he'd remember them as good customers rather than suspicious passengers. As the taxi drove away, Sophia led him to a side entrance, using a key to open a door that looked like it led to a maintenance area. Inside, they climbed narrow stairs to the 3rd floor. The building was silent except for the muffled sound of a television somewhere. At the end of a hallway, Sophia knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. The door opened, and Marco came face to face with a ghost. Carmine Vitelli looked older than Marco remembered, which made sense. 23 years would age anyone. His dark hair had gone mostly gray and deep lines creased his face. He'd lost weight, looked almost gaunt. But the eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, carrying the weight of secrets. Marco, his uncle said, his voice rough with emotion. Dio mio, look at you, all grown up. You look just like your father. For a moment, Marco couldn't speak, couldn't move. He was 5 years old again, watching his uncle disappear into the night. He was 10 at his father's funeral, wishing Carmine had been there. He was 15, finding his uncle's photograph and wondering what had really happened. Uncle Carmine, he finally managed. Then they were embracing, 2 men separated by decades of silence, reunited by violence and necessity. Marco felt his uncle's thin shoulders beneath his hands, felt the old man shaking. Whether from emotion or fear or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. When they separated, Marco saw tears on his uncle's weathered face. I'm sorry, Carmine said, for everything, for disappearing, for not being there when your father died, for bringing this danger to your door. I never wanted any of this. Tell me, Marco said, his voice hard despite his emotions. Tell me everything. Who ordered the Marconi hit? Who's trying to kill you? Who's the traitor in my organization? Carmine glanced at Sophia, who nodded and locked the door behind them, engaging multiple deadbolts. The safe house was sparse, a small apartment with basic furniture, windows covered with heavy curtains, and equipment that Marco recognized as surveillance and communication gear. Sit, Carmine said, gesturing to a worn couch. This is going to take a while. Marco sat, and his uncle settled into a chair across from him, suddenly looking very old and very tired. In 1998, Carmine began, Governor Marconi was getting close to something big. He'd been investigating corruption for 2 years, mob connections to city contracts, money laundering through political campaigns, judges on the take. But what he didn't know was that the corruption went higher than anyone suspected. It wasn't just mob guys bribing politicians. It was politicians and law enforcement working with the mob as full partners. The syndicate, Marco said quietly, remembering whispered stories from his childhood. Carmine nodded. The syndicate wasn't a myth. It was real. A partnership between crime families, politicians, federal agents, and business leaders. They controlled everything. Construction contracts, union leadership, law enforcement investigations, even federal prosecutions. They decided who got arrested and who walked free, who got rich and who disappeared. And Marconi found out. He was close, too close. So they decided to eliminate him and blame it on traditional organized crime. Kill the governor, trigger a massive federal crackdown on the mob families, eliminate their criminal competition and solidify their own power. Carmine's hands were shaking now. They ordered the hit, Marco. And they used our family to do it. Used us without our knowledge, made us think we were just providing logistical support for an unrelated operation. Who? Marco demanded. Give me a name. Carmine took a deep breath. Paul Donovan. The name meant nothing to Marco for a moment. Then memory clicked into place. Paul Donovan, former FBI special agent in charge of the Boston field office, now the director of the Massachusetts State Police. A man with impeccable credentials, a reputation for integrity, and enough political connections to be considered a future gubernatorial candidate. Donovan ordered the Marconi assassination. He coordinated it, Carmine corrected, along with 3 others, a federal judge, a state senator, and, he paused, pain crossing his face, and Vincent Romano. Marco's blood went cold. Vincent Romano, his father's oldest friend, his own godfather, the man who'd helped Marco consolidate power after his father's death, currently the underboss of Marco's organization, his most trusted advisor. No, Marco said flatly. Vincent has been loyal to this family for 40 years. He's been playing both sides for 40 years, Carmine replied sadly. Vincent was the inside man, Marco. He made sure the bomb got to the right place, that the timing was perfect, that no one in our family asked the wrong questions. And when I accidentally recorded him discussing it with Donovan, he's the one who came after me. Your father never knew. I made sure of that. Salvatore died believing Vincent was loyal. Marco stood abruptly, pacing the small apartment, his mind rejecting what he was hearing. Vincent Romano had been at every important moment of his life, had taught him the business, had stood beside him at his father's funeral, had helped him navigate the treacherous waters of succession and consolidation, had possibly been planning to kill him from the moment those plans threatened to expose decades-old secrets. The recordings, Marco said. I need to hear them. Carmine nodded to Sophia, who retrieved a laptop from the bedroom. She opened it, typed a password, and pulled up audio files. These are copies, she explained. The originals are in federal custody, sealed under court order pending a resolution of the situation, but Carmine kept backups. She clicked play. The audio was scratchy, distant, but clear enough. Marco heard his uncle's voice first, younger, setting up what sounded like a routine business meeting. Then other voices joined, and there, unmistakable, was Vincent Romano's distinctive raspy tone. The target is confirmed for October 15th, Vincent's voice said. The device will be in place by noon. Marconi's schedule has him leaving the State House at 2:30. We'll have a 3-minute window. Another voice, refined, educated, carrying authority. And your people are insulated? No connections that lead back to us? The crew thinks they're handling a union problem, Vincent replied. They don't know the real target. When it's done, we'll clean up the loose ends. Good, the authoritative voice said. And then, chillingly, for the syndicate. The recording continued for another minute, discussing logistics, money, and the planned federal crackdown that would follow the assassination. Marco listened in growing horror as his godfather calmly discussed mass murder and the destruction of families, including, potentially, his own. When the recording ended, the silence in the safe house was absolute. I have 3 more like that, Carmine said quietly. Different meetings, different details, but always the same players. Vincent, Donovan, Judge Malcolm Crawford, and State Senator Richard Burke, the 4 pillars of the syndicate in Boston. Burke died 5 years ago, Marco said numbly. Heart attack. Convenient, Sophia interjected, especially since he'd started drinking heavily and talking in bars about old secrets. His death was never properly investigated. Marco's phone buzzed. A text from Vincent Romano. Just heard about the restaurant. Thank God you're alive. Where are you? I'm coming to get you. We need to talk about security. The traitor, reaching out to locate him, to finish what the shooters had failed to do. Marco showed the phone to Carmine and Sophia. His uncle's face darkened. Don't respond, Sophia advised. Not until we have a plan. We need more than a plan, Marco said, his voice hard. We need to end this. Tonight. All of them. He looked at his uncle, at the marshal who'd broken protocol to protect him, and made a decision that would either save his family or destroy it forever. Tell me everything, he said. Every detail, every player, every piece of evidence. And then tell me how we're going to bury these bastards before sunrise. The safe house felt smaller with each passing minute, the walls closing in as Marco absorbed the full weight of what his uncle was telling him. Carmine had spread documents across the small dining table, photocopies of financial records, surveillance photographs yellowed with age, and printed transcripts of recordings that detailed a conspiracy stretching back decades. Vincent wasn't just a participant, Carmine explained, pointing to a grainy photograph of Vincent Romano meeting with Paul Donovan outside a courthouse in 1997. He was the architect. The syndicate needed someone inside the families, someone with the trust and access to make things happen without raising suspicion. Vincent was perfect. Your father's best friend, a respected capo, Someone no one would ever suspect. Marco stared at the photograph, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. In the image, Vincent looked younger but recognizable. The same calculating eyes, the same confident posture. And beside him, Paul Donovan, then just an ambitious FBI agent looking to climb the ladder. How many people did they kill? Marco asked quietly. That we know of. 17. Sophia answered, pulling up a file on her laptop. Governor Marconi and his wife were just the most public. But there were witnesses who disappeared, investigators who had accidents, family members who asked too many questions. The syndicate didn't just order the hit, they spent years covering their tracks, eliminating anyone who might connect the dots, including trying to eliminate you, Marco said to his uncle. Carmine nodded, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he lit a cigarette, a habit Marco remembered from childhood. I got lucky. When I realized what I'd recorded, I made copies and hid them in 3 different locations. Then I went to your father, but Vincent was there that night, the night you remember, when you were sitting on the stairs. Marco's memory flashed back to that moment, 5 years old, watching through the banister as his father and uncle argued in hushed, angry tones. Vincent showed up unexpectedly, Carmine continued. I saw the look in his eyes and knew he'd come to kill me. So I lied. Told your father I'd been skimming money, that I was ashamed and wanted to disappear before I brought disgrace to the family. Salvatore was furious, but he let me go. He thought he was saving the family's honor. He never knew he was saving my life. And Vincent believed you ran because of the money? For a while, yes, but eventually, he realized I might have taken something more valuable. That's when the hunting started. For 23 years, I've been one step ahead of him. Changed identities, moved constantly, lived like a ghost. Until 3 years ago when I finally contacted the federal marshals and offered to testify. Sophia picked up the narrative. Carmine reached out through secure channels. The evidence he had was explosive, enough to bring down not just the syndicate but to expose decades of institutional corruption. But there was a problem. The case was so sensitive that only a handful of people knew about it. And 2 months before Carmine was supposed to give his official testimony, someone leaked his location. Someone in the Marshal Service, Marco stated, or someone with access to their systems, Sophia confirmed. We've been trying to identify the leak, but whoever it is, they're careful. Every time we get close, another attempt happens and we have to relocate Carmine again. It's been a nightmare. Marco's phone buzzed again. Another text from Vincent. Marco, I'm worried. The people who hit the restaurant are still out there. You need protection. Tell me where you are. The audacity of it. The man who'd ordered the hit pretending to be concerned for his safety. Marco felt rage building in his chest, cold and calculating. How many people know Carmine's alive? He asked Sophia. Officially? 6 people in the Marshal Service, 3 in the FBI, and 2 federal prosecutors. Unofficially? Someone in the syndicate knows, or they wouldn't keep trying to kill him. And now they know I know, Marco said, thinking through the implications. The hit tonight wasn't random. They saw Sophia approach me, saw us talking. They know we made contact. Carmine stubbed out his cigarette. Which means you're a target now too, nephew. I'm sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. I was always in this, Marco replied. Vincent made sure of that when he helped me take over after my father died. He's been controlling me, positioning me, probably planning to eliminate me once I served my purpose. He stood and walked to the window, carefully moving the curtain aside to look out at the Charlestown street below. Quiet, residential, no obvious surveillance. But they were out there. Vincent's people, Donovan's people, maybe even federal agents compromised by the syndicate. We can't run, Marco said, turning back to face them. They'll keep hunting. And we can't go to the authorities because we don't know who to trust. So there's only one option. We go on offense. We force them into the open and end this tonight. How? Sophia asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected what he was thinking. We give them what they want, Marco said. Me and Carmine together, vulnerable. We bait the trap with the 2 people they most need to kill. And when they come for us, we take them all down. Carmine shook his head. That's suicide, Marco. These aren't street thugs. Vincent has resources, connections, decades of experience. And Donovan has the entire state police at his command. Which is why we need help, Marco replied, already formulating the plan. Sophia, you said the Marshal Service has people you trust. People who aren't compromised. My supervisor, Deputy Marshal Catherine Walsh, and maybe 2 others on my team. But that's it. I can't risk bringing in anyone else. 4 marshals plus me, you, and Carmine, 7 people. Marco calculated quickly. Not enough to fight Vincent's crew and Donovan's people if they come in force. Then we need to make sure they don't come in force, Sophia said, catching on to his thinking. We need to make it look like a quiet meeting. Something secret. Something they'd want to handle personally rather than sending an army. Marco nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. Vincent will want to see me in person, to find out what I know and what Carmine told me. He'll bring muscle, but not too much. He can't afford to make it obvious he's trying to kill me. And Donovan's arrogant, Sophia interjected. He thinks he's untouchable. If we offer him a chance to eliminate both loose ends at once, he might take it himself. Then we give them what they expect, Marco said, pulling out his phone. A panicked young boss, scared and confused, reaching out to his godfather for help. Vincent won't be able to resist. And where do we set this trap? Carmine asked. Marco smiled, but there was no humor in it. Somewhere symbolic. Somewhere that means something to all of us. He looked at his uncle. The warehouse on Constitution Wharf. You remember it. Recognition flickered in Carmine's eyes. Where your grandfather ran his importing business. Where your father had his office before he moved operations to the restaurant. It's abandoned now, Marco said. Has been for 10 years, but I still own it through a shell company. No surveillance, no witnesses, and most importantly, it's neutral ground. Vincent will believe I'd go there to hide, to think, and he'll know exactly how to get there without being seen. Sophia was already working on her laptop, pulling up satellite images of the warehouse and the surrounding area. It's isolated. The wharf is mostly commercial, empty at night. Good sightlines, multiple exits. We could work with this. Call your supervisor, Marco instructed. Tell her what's happening. Tell her we're forcing the syndicate's hand tonight, and we need marshals who can shoot straight and keep their mouths shut. No FBI, no state police, no one who might be compromised. While Sophia made the call, stepping into the bedroom for privacy, Marco composed a text to Vincent. Every word had to be perfect, panicked enough to be believable but not so desperate that it raised suspicion. Vincent, it's bad, really bad. Carmine is alive. He found me. Says you're involved in something from the 90s. I don't know what to believe. I'm scared. Can't trust anyone. Need to meet. Just you. The old warehouse on Constitution Wharf. 1 hour. Please, I need answers. He showed the text to Carmine before sending it. His uncle read it and nodded slowly. He'll come. He has to. If he doesn't, you'll know he's guilty and he can't risk that. Marco hit send. The response came within 30 seconds. I'm coming. Don't trust Carmine. He's been lying for 23 years. I'll explain everything. Stay put. 1 hour. He's committed, Marco said, showing the exchange to Carmine. Now for Donovan. This part was trickier. Marco didn't have a direct line to the director of the Massachusetts State Police, but he knew someone who did. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for Judge Malcolm Crawford's widow, Patricia. She'd remarried after the judge's death, to Paul Donovan. It was a connection most people had forgotten, but Marco made it his business to remember every thread in Boston's web of power. He dialed her number. After 4 rings, a sleepy female voice answered. Hello? Mrs. Donovan, this is Marco Vitelli. I apologize for the late hour, but I need to speak with your husband urgently. It's a matter of life and death. There was a pause, then the sound of rustling sheets. Mr. Vitelli, it's past midnight. Can't this wait until... It's about Carmine Vitelli, Marco interrupted. And Governor Marconi. I think your husband will want to take this call. Another pause, longer this time. Then Paul Donovan's voice came on the line, alert, despite the hour. Vitelli, what's this about? Director Donovan, Marco said, his tone respectful but urgent. My uncle has resurfaced. He's been feeding me stories about the Marconi assassination, about corruption, about you. I don't know what to believe, but I thought you should know. He has recordings, documents. Says he's going to release them to the media tomorrow, unless I help him. Where is he? Donovan's voice was sharp now, all pretense of sleepiness gone. I'm meeting him in an hour. Constitution Wharf, the old Vitelli warehouse. He wants me to help him disappear again, give him money and resources. But Director, if these allegations are true, if there's any truth to what he's saying, Marco let his voice trail off. Uncertain. There isn't, Donovan said firmly. Your uncle is a paranoid fantasist who's been hiding from his own crimes for 2 decades. But if he's making these accusations publicly, I need to address them. What time is this meeting? 1 hour. Midnight exactly. I'll be there, Donovan said. With a small security team. We'll sort this out, Mr. Vitelli. Your uncle needs psychiatric help, not a platform for conspiracy theories." The line went dead. Marco looked up to find Sophia standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of respect and concern. "You're good at this." "I've had practice," Marco replied. "What did your supervisor say?" "She's in. She's bringing 2 deputies she'd trust with her life. They'll be at the warehouse in 45 minutes, setting up positions. But Marco, she wants you to know. If this goes wrong, if the syndicate has more resources than we expect, we're all dead. No backup. No cavalry coming to save us." "I know," Marco said quietly. He looked at his uncle. "You don't have to do this. We could hide you again, set up new protection." Carmine shook his head, standing with difficulty. "I've been running for 23 years, Marco. I'm tired. And more than that, I'm tired of these bastards getting away with murder, with destroying families, with corrupting everything they touch. If I'm going to die, I'd rather it be fighting than hiding." Marco embraced his uncle again, feeling the old man's thin frame, the years of stress and fear that had worn him down. "We're going to survive this," he said. "Both of us. And tomorrow Vincent and Donovan are going to prison or in the ground. I promise you that." They spent the next 30 minutes preparing. Sophia distributed weapons from a safe hidden in the apartment. Glock pistols, extra magazines, Kevlar vests. Not enough to withstand a sustained assault, but enough to give them a fighting chance. Marco called Tommy, who was at the hospital with Luca. "How is he?" "Bullet went through his shoulder clean. He'll be okay." "Boss, what the hell happened tonight?" "I'll explain later. Right now I need you to do something for me. Get out of the hospital, tell Luca's doctors it's family business, they'll understand. Then go to the warehouse on Constitution Wharf. There's going to be trouble there around midnight. I need you watching my back." "I'm on my way," Tommy said without hesitation. "And boss, whatever this is about, we're with you." Marco ended the call and checked his watch. 11:15. 45 minutes until midnight. Time to move. They left the safe house through a back exit, taking Sophia's car, a nondescript Honda Civic that wouldn't attract attention. The drive to Constitution Wharf took 15 minutes through quiet streets. Boston looked peaceful at this hour, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. But Marco knew that beneath the calm surface, predators were moving into position. The warehouse district was dark and silent, the old buildings looming like tombstones against the night sky. Constitution Wharf jutted into the harbor, the water lapping quietly against the pilings. The Vitelli warehouse sat at the end of the wharf, 3 stories of brick and rusted metal, windows long since broken, doors chained shut. Sophia parked 2 blocks away. They approached on foot, staying in the shadows. As they got closer, Marco saw movement. Deputy Marshal Walsh and her team were already in position, using night vision equipment to scan the approaches. Walsh was a severe-looking woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore tactical gear and carried an AR-15 with the casual competence of someone who'd seen combat. "Mr. Vitelli," she said quietly as they approached. "Marshal Rossi briefed me on the situation. This is insane, you know that?" "Completely," Marco agreed. "But it's the only play we have." Walsh gestured to the warehouse. "We've cleared the interior. 3 floors, multiple rooms, plenty of cover. We've set up positions on the 2nd and 3rd floors with clear sight lines to the main floor. My people won't engage unless absolutely necessary. We need Donovan and Romano to incriminate themselves on tape before we move." "You're recording?" "Audio and video," Sophia confirmed, showing him a small wireless camera clipped to his jacket. "Federal evidence standards. Whatever they say tonight will be admissible in court." Assuming any of us survived to see a courtroom, Marco thought, but didn't say. Tommy arrived 10 minutes later, his face grim. "Luca sends his regards. Says next time you plan a war, give him more notice so he can wear his vest." Marco smiled despite the tension. "Tell him I'll try to remember that." They entered the warehouse through a side door, the chain cut with bolt cutters Walsh had provided. Inside, the space was cavernous and dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through broken skylights. The air smelled of rust, salt water, and decay. This had once been his grandfather's empire. Now it was just another abandoned building, a monument to a dying way of life. Marco stood in the center of the main floor while the others took their positions. Sophia and Carmine would be with him, visible. Tommy and Walsh's team would be hidden, waiting for the moment to spring the trap. At 11:55, Marco's phone buzzed. "Vincent, I'm here, coming in through the main entrance." And 30 seconds later, from a blocked number, "This is Donovan. I'm approaching from the water side. Tell your uncle no sudden moves." They were both here. The trap was set. Marco looked at his uncle standing beside him in the darkness. Carmine looked terrified but resolute, his hand resting on the pistol Sophia had given him. "Remember," Marco said quietly, "we need them to talk, to admit what they did. The recording is everything." Carmine nodded. "I've been waiting 23 years to look Vincent in the eye. A few more minutes won't kill me. Let's make sure nothing kills you," Sophia murmured, checking her weapon one final time. The warehouse's main door creaked open. Vincent Romano stepped inside, flanked by two men Marco recognized, enforcers from his organization, loyal to Vincent. They swept the space with flashlights before Vincent moved forward into the moonlight. His godfather looked older than Marco remembered from their last meeting, or perhaps it was just the harsh shadows cast by the flashlights. Vincent's face was lined with years of secrets and violence, his eyes calculating as they found Marco in the darkness. "Marco," he said, his voice carrying genuine concern, or a perfect imitation of it. "Thank God you're safe. When I heard about the restaurant—" "You heard fast," Marco observed, "almost like you knew it was going to happen." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Before Marco could answer, the side door opened. Paul Donovan entered with 4 state troopers in tactical gear, weapons drawn but pointed at the ground. The director of the Massachusetts State Police looked every inch the authority figure, tall, silver-haired, commanding presence. "Lower your weapons," he ordered his men, though they kept them ready. His eyes moved from Marco to Carmine, and Marco saw recognition flash across his face. "So it's true. The prodigal uncle returns." "Director Donovan," Vincent said, surprise in his voice. "I didn't know you were coming." "Mr. Vitelli called me," Donovan replied smoothly. "Said there were serious allegations being made. I thought I should be here to address them personally." The two men looked at each other across the warehouse floor, and in that moment Marco saw the truth. They'd come separately, each thinking they were dealing with this situation independently. But now, they were both here, both committed, both exposed. "Perfect. Uncle Carmine," Marco said loudly, his voice echoing in the empty warehouse. "Why don't you tell Director Donovan and Vincent what you told me, about Governor Marconi, about the syndicate, about who really ordered the assassination?" Carmine stepped forward into the light, and Marco watched both Vincent and Donovan tense. His uncle's voice was steady as he spoke. "October 15, 1998. Governor Anthony Marconi and his wife were killed by a car bomb outside the State House. The investigation blamed organized crime, destroyed 3 families, sent dozens of people to prison. But the people who actually ordered the hit walked free, got promoted, built careers on the bodies they buried." "This is fantasy," Donovan said dismissively. "The ravings of a fugitive who—" "I have recordings," Carmine interrupted. "Your voice, Vincent's, Judge Crawford's, planning the hit, discussing logistics, dividing the spoils. 23 years of evidence, and it's all about to become public." Vincent's hand moved toward his jacket. Marco's own hand went to his weapon. Around them, in the darkness, guns were being aimed. "I wouldn't," Marco said quietly. "We're not alone here, Vincent. And everything you say is being recorded, so maybe we should all be very careful about our next moves." The warehouse was silent except for the sound of water lapping against the pilings below. 2 old men with decades of secrets. A young boss caught between loyalty and truth, and in the shadows witnesses waiting to see which way the scales would tip. Vincent's hand stopped moving. He looked at Marco with something like sadness. "Your father would be disappointed in you," he said quietly. "My father would be proud that I'm finally catching his brother's killer," Marco replied. Vincent's expression hardened. "Salvatore never knew that his best friend betrayed him," Marco finished. "That the man he trusted was working for the people who destroyed everything he built. But I know, Vincent, and now the whole world is going to know." Donovan stepped forward, his hand raised. "Gentlemen, let's all stay calm. Mr. Vitelli, you're making serious accusations against you," Carmine said, his voice stronger now. "You coordinated everything, Director. The bomb, the cover-up, the investigation that conveniently missed all the real culprits. You used the Marconi assassination to eliminate your competition and build your career. You're not here to address allegations. You're here to kill the last 2 people who can prove what you did." Donovan's mask slipped for just a moment, and Marco saw the cold calculation underneath. The director's eyes flickered to his troopers, to Vincent's men, measuring odds and options. "The problem with accusations," Donovan said slowly, "is that dead men can't testify, and recordings can be misplaced. It was as close to a confession as they were going to get. Marco raised his hand, the signal, and all hell broke loose in the warehouse. Marshal Walsh's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Federal marshals, drop your weapons now." Flashlights blazed from the upper floors, illuminating the warehouse in harsh white light. Vincent's men raised their weapons, but Tommy emerged from behind a stack of crates, his gun trained on them. "Don't even think about it." Donovan's troopers looked to their director, uncertain. These were good cops, Marco realized. Men who'd followed orders without knowing they were serving a corrupt master. "Director Donovan," Walsh called down, her rifle aimed at his chest. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and corruption under color of authority. Order your men to stand down." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was so thick Marco could barely breathe. Then Vincent laughed, a bitter, defeated sound. 23 years, he said, looking at Carmine. "I should have killed you that night instead of letting you run. You should have never killed Marconi," Carmine replied quietly. "You should have been the man my brother believed you were." Vincent's hand went for his gun. Marco was faster, his weapon clearing leather in a smooth motion. The shot echoed like thunder in the enclosed space, and Vincent staggered back, clutching his shoulder. "Don't," Marco said, his voice cold. "Don't make me kill my godfather." Donovan's troopers, seeing their director's guilt confirmed, slowly lowered their weapons. The fight went out of the room like air from a punctured tire. Walsh's team moved in, securing the scene with professional efficiency. As federal agents led Vincent and Donovan away in handcuffs, the director turned to Marco one last time. "This won't end here. We have friends you can't imagine." "Had friends," Marco corrected. Past tense. "The syndicate dies tonight." 3 months later, Marco stood outside Ristorante Paradiso, watching workers install new windows. The restaurant would reopen next week, renovated and renewed. Giuseppe was gone, testified against Vincent in exchange for a reduced sentence. The new manager was someone Marco had vetted personally. Sophia approached, no longer in a server's uniform but professional clothes. She was testifying before a grand jury later today, one of dozens of witnesses in the sprawling corruption case that had consumed Massachusetts politics. "How's Carmine?" Marco asked. "Good. The Marshal Service offered him permanent protection, but he declined. Says he's tired of hiding." She smiled slightly. "He's thinking of opening a restaurant. Says he wants to teach you his old recipes." Marco smiled at that. His uncle, finally free. "And you?" he asked. "What happens to the Marshal who broke 40 protocols? Officially, I'm on administrative leave pending investigation. Unofficially, they're talking about commendation. Turns out exposing a decades-old conspiracy buys you some goodwill." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the North End come alive with morning activity. "Vincent's pleading guilty," Marco said quietly. "Donovan's fighting, but with the recordings, he doesn't have a chance. The syndicate is finished." "And your organization?" Marco had been asking himself that question for 3 months. He'd built an empire on his father's foundation, never knowing it was constructed on lies and blood. Now he had a choice: continue the life or walk away. "I'm restructuring," he said finally. "Going legitimate. It'll take time, but the old ways. They died with Vincent." Sophia nodded, understanding. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so," Marco replied, thinking of Salvatore Vitelli, who died never knowing his best friend's betrayal. "I really hope so." As Sophia walked away toward her car, Marco's phone buzzed. "Tommy, Luca's cleared for duty. Says the shoulder's good as new. What's the play, boss?" Marco looked at the restaurant, at the neighborhood his grandfather had helped build, at the city his family had shaped for better and worse. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. He typed back, "Tell Luca welcome back. And Tommy, call me Marco from now on. The boss thing, I think we're done with that." He pocketed his phone and walked into Ristorante Paradiso, ready to build something new from the ashes of the old. Some empires fall, some transform. Marco Vitelli was betting everything on transformation. 6 months later, former FBI Director Paul Donovan was convicted on 18 federal charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. Vincent Romano died in custody before his trial. Officially a heart attack, though some whispered it was something more final. Carmine Vitelli opened a small trattoria in the North End, where he teaches traditional Italian cooking to a new generation. He and his nephew have dinner there every Sunday. Marco Vitelli divested from all criminal enterprises within 2 years. transforming his organization into a legitimate business empire focused on restaurants, real estate, and community investment. He never married, never had children, but he's known throughout Boston as a man who chose redemption over revenge. And Sophia Rossi? She left the Marshal Service and now runs a security consulting firm. Some say she still meets with Marco occasionally, that there's something unfinished between them. But that's another story.